there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Hi, I'm Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented by 3 self-certified TEFLologists.
TEFL News.
Okay, so for today's TEFL News, I'd like to talk about the powers. Yeah, no, I'll leave it going. It's fine. For today's TEFL News, I'm going to talk about the powers of being a good storyteller.
Okay.
And how it can make you happier in life and in love.
All right. Well, something we all need, obviously.
This was an article that came to my attention from ELT Jam on Twitter. ELT Jam is retweeted by them. And it's an article by Elizabeth Bernstein from the Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
It's referring to a study that's been done recently about storytelling.
Hence the news.
Yeah,
Okay.
Hence the news. So first of all, let's talk about our language classroom first, which this isn't really related to, but let's make it related to, because often we do with these things. How does storytelling figure in your teaching or your teaching approach?
Define storytelling.
Well, like how much of an emphasis do you put on getting the students to tell stories in your classes, or how often do you, when you're engaging with students, do you kind of ask them about their day or what they've been doing recently? Or
Well, I think those are very different things. I mean, like, obviously I speak to my students and ask them questions and stuff. In terms of it coming into the actual language work in the class, I think the only time it's been something that I've specifically instructed them to do, where it's been like a kind of formalized storytelling recently, has been with writing poems in my poetry class, which is actually a content class, but anyway. And they've been writing poems about themselves, about aspects of their life or their emotions or their mental states. So that features quite a lot in that class, but other than that, not very much.
I mean, I'm just thinking about my own learners. The learners that engage me the most is when I say, "How are you?" They tell me something. Like they tell me
They answer your question.
They don't just say, I'm fine, thanks.
Right.
And you?
They kind of say, and then they kind of say what they've been doing recently. And that for me, that makes me kind of interested in them more, because I get to find out what they've been doing and the way that they describe it and talk about like an anecdote from their previous week or something.
Yeah, okay. I guess, maybe a story is defined, like it needs a beginning, a middle, and end, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Maybe
for a good story.
For a good story. And I don't know if it's really connected, but I guess there's also this, and it's maybe a more modern word that people use in terms of like narratives.
Yeah.
Which sounds like it should be a story, but it often means more like a theme or something that kind of continues over time.
Yeah.
And I think those kind of things come up in the classroom, if and it's often like maybe in jokes or more like asides rather than.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be related to the teaching whatever target language you have.
Yeah.
But often it's a theme of a certain student who always makes a certain mistake or those kind of things in a lighthearted way.
It sounds a bit like bullying.
I think when I interviewed Jane Spiro, if you remember that interview, she talked about she was trying to say that creativity in ELT shouldn't be a separate thing that we try and do. We should try and make every part of our teaching have some sort of creative kind of element or base to it. And I think one of those is just listening to stories or anecdotes from the students and getting them to describe their kind of worldly experiences. Essentially, that's what storytelling is.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if somebody's talking, it's going to be more interesting and listenable if it's framed as a story.
Right.
Yep, and there's good and bad stories, and what I'm going to talk about today is, like I said, good storytellers are happier in life and in love.
Okay.
And this comes from a research article by John Donoghue and Melanie Green of the University of Buffalo. this is available on Wiley Online Library, and it's titled "A Good Story: Men's Storytelling Ability Affects Their Attractiveness and Perceived Status."
Okay.
Okay, so
We've got a friend who'd be well into this research.
So let's read on. So right, yes, yeah. Well, that's kind of the reason I brought it up. Anyway, so research shows that the way people construct their individual stories has a large impact on their physical and mental health. And people who frame their personal narratives in a positive way have more life satisfaction.
So wait, say that last part again.
People who frame their personal narratives in a positive way have more life satisfaction.
Okay.
Or at least it looks like they do on Facebook.
Yeah. So yeah.
Is they're framing it for themselves or for other people?
I think for other people, but
Okay.
it might be also a way of how you see your
Those are annoying.
your place in the world. So like something really mundane could happen to you, but then you could extrapolate it out into a great kind of.
You could lie.
I don't think it's lying.
No,
I don't
it doesn't
think
have
it's
to be lying.
But that's the point. You're being a good storyteller, and
Right.
thus it gives you more satisfaction.
Yeah, I mean, but everyone does that, right? Everyone, whatever experience you have, when you tell it to someone else, it gets embellished and you add things and you maybe cast yourself in a more heroic light or whatever.
Or more comedic light. Or,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But this study says that people find that an attractive value.
I don't.
Being able to, I think being able to tell a good story, sure.
In particular, women find men who are good storytellers more appealing.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one of the main findings.
But I think
of the study.
that's different from what we were just talking about in terms of like. But I also understand that point. People wanting to. Maybe I recognize it more like something I do just for myself. Like the story of the story of my life.
Right.
Isn't that a song?
It's a One
It
Direction
might be.
song.
That's what I thought. Anyway,
Yeah, that's less appealing.
right. But just looking. Basically, it's a natural human trait that you look for narratives in anything, even if they're not there. But I guess people want to see the narratives in their own lives.
Yeah. Look, thinking about this particular study, it consists of 3 smaller studies within the wider study. In one of the studies, in which male participants were shown a picture of someone of the opposite sex and given an indication of whether that person was a proficient storyteller.
What kind of indication?
Well, for example, in the first
An
study...
arrow pointing to them with proficient storyteller.
Well, yeah, in the first study, 71 men...
Holding a book.
71 men and 84 women were told that the person whose picture they were looking at was either a good, moderate, or poor storyteller. In the second study, this is just summarising, in the second study, 32 men and 50 women were given a short story supposedly written by the person in the picture.
Okay.
Half the stories were concise and compelling, and the other half rambled and used dull language.
Right.
And
But again, a story, like a written story and a spoken story, are different. You use different rhetorical tricks and styles.
Yeah.
But you have a Yeah, that's true, but you have a repertoire of stories.
But maybe the point is it doesn't matter how they're telling the story.
Okay.
Third study, 60 men and 81 women were told whether the person in the picture was a good storyteller and were asked to rate their social status and ability to be a good leader in addition to their attractiveness.
Right.
Okay.
So one of the main results was that women rated men who were good storytellers and more attractive and desirable as potential long-term partners.
Okay.
Yep.
Are you
It seems
surprised
like...
by that?
Well, I mean, did
Men,
men
men, on the other hand, didn't rate that.
Oh, really?
That's not surprising.
Okay. Why do you think that's not surprising?
Maybe I don't mean that, but
Men are shallow.
right. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Well, I mean, it makes it...
Men didn't care whether women were good storytellers or not.
It seems to me like a strange thing. I mean, just saying here is a person, like you've got 3 people, one of them has a positive trait, one of them has a medium trait, one of them has a poor trait. Which one do you prefer? And the only thing you know about them is that this one has this positive trait.
Well, and their physical appearance.
And their physical appearance, okay. So but then, people fancy different people. I don't know, it seems like a very shaky bit of...
let's
way of measuring it.
So look at the first 2 studies in particular. So in study 1, participants were shown a target photograph, a colour photo, just head and shoulders, nothing else.
The shampoo.
Don't be crude. A target biography, talking about their background, their favourite food, that kind of stuff. All neutral stuff. And then they gave the storytelling ability manipulation. So participants were assigned to one of 4 conditions: good storyteller, moderate storyteller, poor storyteller, or a control condition with no information about the storytelling ability. The good storyteller condition read, and here's the condition that was with the photo: Bill, or Sarah, is a sociable person and he often tells really good stories at parties, particularly due to an interesting variety of word choice. He makes the characters and settings come alive. Because Bill is considered such a storyteller, he is currently writing a novel. Bill is a good friend, and people like to be around him in part because he can tell personal stories.
But yeah,
Be like Bill.
So like Rob said, this person is good at something. Does that make them more attractive?
He's also a good friend. He's also good at parties.
Right, so they're bringing in some other
sociable.
things there. They're not just
He's currently
talking
writing a novel.
Yeah.
So they're not just talking about his stories. They're talking about his other things.
Yeah, they're saying Bill is a nice person who's
Yeah.
good at stuff. I want to see what the negative one was. It was like Bill is a tedious arsehole.
They didn't put that in
He
the
smells
study.
a bit.
The study itself was quite short, and they only used this. Maybe if I'd have scrolled down to the appendix, there might be more. But in the second one, participants examined.
I've read it.
I did read it. In the second study, participants examined a picture and a brief biography of a member of the opposite sex. They were informed that an accompanying story had been told by that person.
Yeah.
And then they read the story.
Mm-hmm.
Here's just an excerpt from the story. The one time when my friend Mike was little, his mum went to the grocery store at night, and she told his dad that he needed to make sure Mike and his brother went to bed. Well, since Mike's dad was always considered the fun dad, he decided to create playtime instead of a nap time and neglected to follow his wife's instructions.
Okay.
Do you want to
Was
hear
that the good or the bad story?
Or do you want to hear more?
No.
No.
But that is the good story.
All right.
I was hoping you'd say yes.
Partly how it's told, maybe.
Well, okay. Well, now you're bringing me into it now. Okay.
Yeah.
My point is, as English teachers, should we be trying to develop storytelling skills in our learners?
To get them
In
laid.
our learners.
No, that's not the reason. That's one
I
application.
mean, being a good storyteller is a useful skill, I think.
And this study shows that people are more attractive just in life in general. If we help our learners to be more better storytellers, then that's,
But do you think
a
that's
good skill, isn't it?
Right. But do you think that's... I mean, how do you go about improving somebody's skills as a storyteller?
Well, they talk about the specifics of a good story in here, the use of vocabulary, the use of kind of believable characters.
Yeah.
You know, could we not work on our learners' stories?
Certain aspects of
it.
Certain aspects of it. But also, I think the teachers, if we're trying to teach our students to be good storytellers, we have to be good storytellers ourselves.
So that's what I was going to say as well. That's the other application. That's the other reason for it.
I think there's more complexity than to the ways people communicate. I mean, like the gendered aspect of this is quite interesting because there's a big body of work on language and gender differences, and I think it's Deborah Tannen talks about men engage more in report talk, just like telling people things. Women engage more in rapport talk, where they exchange. So I mean, I just think it's more complex than just making people. I mean, I think making people good storytellers is useful. You know, being a good storyteller is a good thing, but the way that people interact, you can't reduce it down to one thing like that and say this is going to make you more socially appealing.
Nobody's saying that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Fine.
But I'm just wondering if this. I mean, this isn't directly related to teaching, but I'm just wondering if we could use storytelling as more of a skill for just being a more a more proficient English speaker in general. If they know how to tell a story confidently, they're going to affect the way people see them and view them, and that could have like positive outcomes for their.
I think it's a great language practice task, and it's a good way to expose students to language.
Yeah.
Obviously, telling them a story is going to be more engaging than telling them something that's not a story, a list of facts or something. I think. I mean, for me though, the big issue there is that some people are natural storytellers. Some people are better storytellers than others, and there are ways maybe to improve that skill, but it's tricky. It's not easy.
Is there anything specific to English language storytelling? Like, I mean, if if some people are natural storytellers and some people aren't, then they're just going to they might just use the language and map it onto their natural skills. I
think that is maybe that is an interesting area of this, is that culturally specific ways of telling stories. I remember reading an article a while ago about how it was a very kind of crude breakdown of the difference between Eastern and Western storytelling styles. But basically, the Western storytelling style will start with the kind of big, set the scene, and then kind of slowly move in on the details. Whereas the Eastern style might just provide a bunch of details and then slowly piece together what's happening. And maybe raising awareness of those kind of differences might be something worthwhile.
So we'll provide a link to this article with today's podcast episode, so you can read more about it.
TEFL Pioneers. Today's TEFL pioneer is Tsuda Umeko. So she was born in 1864, died in 1929, and she was the founder of Tsuda University, which still exists. We've been criticised in the past for not having that many female TEFL pioneers, so I think this goes some way to redressing that balance.
Who's criticised this, Rob?
Just people in the world.
Yeah.
The reason that I found out about Umeko was because so I work at a women's university, and it looks like I'll be there for a while. So I wanted to learn about that aspect of education. So I've been reading about women's universities in Japan and women's education in Japan, and she is a name that comes up again and again and again in women's education. So I'll tell you a little bit of her background and then of her story and how she came to start the school and how specifically it relates to language teaching. So she was born the daughter of a guy called Tsuda Sen. Sen was his first name, who was a low-ranking samurai, very ambitious but failed in a lot of his plans. And he wanted sons to sort of help out with his businesses and that kind of thing. And he wasn't very interested in his daughter when she was born. He ignored her. He didn't even show up for her naming ceremony. So her mother chose her name based on a tree that she saw outside the window. It's a plum tree. Ume means plum. And so an opportunity came up for daughters of samurai to study abroad in America. And because he didn't have any particular ambitions for her, Sen decided to send Ume off to America to study English. So at the age of 6 in 1871, at the age of 6, very, very young, she went to the US with 4 other girls. Before she went, she met with the Empress of Japan. They all met with the Empress, who said, "Your intention of studying abroad, considering that you're a girl, is admirable. When, in time, schools for girls are established, you, having finished your studies, shall be examples to your countrywomen. Bear this in mind and apply yourself to your studies day and night." Okay?
Nice.
So she arrived in America with these other girls, and people weren't really sure what to do with them originally. They were kind of taken around and put in places.
They hadn't prepared for them?
They kind of had, but I mean, the girls stayed together. They mostly spoke Japanese together, and they didn't really... they didn't mix. They didn't learn that much English for the first few weeks. So she was separated off from the group, and she went to live with a family called the Lamans. And she stayed there for 11 years.
Wow.
So from the age of 6 to 17, she stayed with the Lamans. And there's a book. I'm going to recommend some books about her at the end of the segment. But there's a book about her experiences, and it's got all these letters she wrote when she was a child, when she was like 7 years old, to her foster mother. They're really cute. They're all in sort of broken English. And so she learned English to a very, very high level, and her Japanese, dropped off completely. She never really recovered her.
Oh, really?
Level.
Wow.
Yeah. She graduated from 2 schools in America, and then she returned to Japan. So what do you think these experiences in America, what do you think her experience of living in America for that much time would have had on her outlook, perhaps her life philosophy?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, the fact that her Japanese language skills kind of dropped off is very interesting. Having spoken Japanese, presumably exclusively Japanese until the age of 6, and then the fact that 11 years of living outside Japan. I suppose she didn't use Japanese at all.
No.
Or very rarely.
When she went to America, the only things she could say in English were yes, no, and thank you.
Yeah.
How old was she when she returned to...
17. So
17, right,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine 6 to 17, would shape a lot of her worldview. I mean, at that point, she'd maybe be more American than Japanese.
Yes, which it seems she more or less was, actually. Okay. So the Japan that she went back to was becoming more and more conservative. So this was in the early years of the Meiji Restoration, which was when Japan had opened up and it was being very westernized. And in 1880... co-education at the primary level, beyond the primary level, had been abolished. So kids were co-educated up to primary level, but beyond that they were separated into boys and girls schools. And the boys could go to university, and girls mostly couldn't. And it was actually very shameful if there was a girl on campus. There's a story in one book that I read of a boy whose sister was an actress, and she came to watch a ceremony that he was taking part in disguise. And when the other students found out she was there, they teased him about it so much he committed suicide.
Wow.
So it was very stigmatized having women in higher education. And the ideas of education were very heavily influenced by Confucianism, which outlined the proper social practices and social place and virtues of women. In Japan particularly, this was encapsulated in a philosophy called Ryosai Kenbo, which means good wife, wise mother. Right? And education was meant to prepare women to be good wives and wise mothers, basically.
Education just up to the
education
end of secondary.
Yes,
Right.
So, interestingly, education had been split into these two streams, which means you now had boys' schools and girls' schools, like high schools. And they needed lots of female teachers to teach in the women's high schools. And they didn't have any because women weren't allowed to attend university.
Right.
So, Ume Tsuda, she went back to America to study biology at Bryn Mawr, I think is the name of the college.
Yeah, Bryn Mawr.
Is that right? Have you heard of that? That was a guess, but there we go.
Okay.
Bryn Mawr. And when she came back to Japan, she opened her own school, which was called the Joshi Eigakujuku in 1900, and that translates as Women's English School. Yeah. So she used the fact that she had learned English and she was very fluent in English to open this school. Yeah. And the school was, as I mentioned, intended to help women pass the government exams for high school teachers, for high school English teachers.
Okay.
And she also wanted to give women a broader base of knowledge. Yeah. So what differences do you think there would be between this the Japanese form of education at the time and the education that she provided in the Joshi Eigakujuku? What do you think?
The difference between
the general education in Japan and
Yeah.
the education in the Joshi Eigakujuku?
Presumably all of her secondary education experience was in the States.
Yes.
So you'd imagine that would have some influence on it. To be honest, I don't know much about American secondary education of more than 100 years ago, but presumably there would be a stronger American influence.
Right, yeah. So maybe it continues in discourses today, but what she wanted to focus on was critical thinking, actually. So Confucianism is very based on this kind of listen and obey. There's a quote from a student of the school at that time, Mishima Sumie. She said, "We were required to prepare thoroughly beforehand and give our opinions in class. We could argue with the teacher and did not have to agree with her if we were not convinced. It was a revelation for me to know that a girl might have her own idea about anything and argue with her honourable teacher." Yeah. So there's this big focus on critical thinking, on being independent. And she wanted to prepare women to be independent members of society. It's actually quite interesting, the school. So they didn't have much money for basically the entire time it was open. And so they had to rent houses. Apparently for a while it was in a haunted house. They all slept in a haunted house. And did all their lessons in the house with ghosts.
On the rides.
Yes.
Like Hogwarts.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, exactly. Yes. But less grand.
Right.
And they lived a very ascetic lifestyle. They're very proud of that. It was very tough. So the focus of the school obviously was on English, and the way that she taught English was through critical discussion. She used lots of American texts, lots of Christian texts, originally just her own books, but also books that were donated from her benefactors in America. The school was maintained by American benefactors, basically. So she created her own textbooks by compiling texts from other sources. In the first year, the students read Little Lord Fauntleroy and translations of Hans Christian Andersen. And later on, they read A Tale of Two Cities, Silas Marner. Poor students. That's a terrible book. And The Last Days of Pompeii. What do you think? Do you think those are good teaching materials?
Depends what the aim is, I suppose. I don't know if it's preparing them for discussion skills. I guess they could discuss the books.
It could be critical of the books.
Yeah.
So she tended to choose books that matched her own life. They were very often
These are all male authors, though, aren't they?
A lot of people were back in those days.
Well,
But the stories were always, or not always, but very often about a young person who suffered some kind of hardship, for example, loss of parents or disability, and then is cheerful and generous and is eventually helped by adults. Yeah, so it very much follows her own story of being sent off to America by her parents, and then being raised by the Landmans, who she kept in contact with for the rest of her life and their life. Yeah. So she thought that exposing her students to English, this is an interesting discussion point maybe, she thought that getting students to read the works of great English writers would make them better human beings and would teach them liberating foreign ideas. What do you think of that?
I mean, sure. I mean, from obviously she's in a very specific context.
Yeah.
And she has ideas about what are, good ideas and the types of ideas that she wants to spread to her students.
she's obviously had the maybe that's the wrong word, the luxury of having an outsider's perspective.
Right.
She can return to Japan but saying again, having what did she say about foreign ideas?
She said it would teach them liberating foreign ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time a lot of people probably agreed with that.
I think you could argue that any outside ideas are, in a sense, liberating, even if it's not a great idea. Just having to engage with different ideas and being aware that those different ideas are out there is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think this focus on being, kind of free thinking and she wasn't actually a feminist in the modern sense. She believed that women had their place, and she didn't like radical. She actually used to threaten to withhold girls' diplomas if they became too involved in radical politics.
Okay.
But she did think women should be kind of autonomous members of society. So moving into her kind of her final years. So she worked at the school. She also had to work lots of other side jobs to keep the school financially afloat. And eventually it resulted in poor health. She had asthma, heart disease, and she died in 1929 at the age of 63, quite young. But her legacy is that the school still exists. So it changed from the women's English school to Tsuda University, or Tsuda College, I think is the English name. I had some students who graduated from there in the past. And these days, women's education is spread very widely in the US. There's in Japan. There are many women's universities, and I think that she focused particularly on educating women in English. English is still kind of seen as kind of a girl's subject in Japan a lot of the time, and I think she played a big part of that. So that's Ume Tsuda. If anyone's interested in reading more about her, I'd recommend, so there's a book by Benjamin Duke called The History of Modern Japanese Education, which has a chapter about women's education in particular. There are two biographies, Barbara Rose, Tsuda Umeko, and Women's Education in Japan, which is very good, and Yoshiko Furuki, The White Plum. And in general, in terms of women's education, there's a book by Yoriko Ida called Women's Higher Education and Social Position Before and After World War II in Japan, which is an interesting book because it's obviously not been proofread. It's written in a very Japanese English, and so I enjoyed it. I recommend those books. So that's this episode's TEFL Pioneer, Tsuda Umeko. TEFL Cultures.
This episode's TEFL culture, you could argue it may come under the banner of TEFL news, but I think it's become such a big part of our culture so far that it qualifies. Obviously, I'm talking about Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know much about Pokemon Go?
Yes.
It was one of my students. Their house was a Pokestop the other day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
I've recently I went out jogging the other night, and the park is usually empty.
But it was full of Pikachus.
Well, it was just
and
full of people like standing in weird positions, just looking at their phones, like not really moving around. And you kind of walk past them and look at them, and they don't look up. And
you want them to make eye contact with you?
It's just weird seeing.
Look at that foreign guy running. How impressive!
It's weird seeing people standing in different corners and positions where you wouldn't normally see people, just kind of looking at their phones. Yeah, it's weird. Carry on.
Okay. Yeah, so it was, a brief bit of background. It was released first in the US and I think Australia and New Zealand on July 6th, and then over the next couple of weeks released throughout the world, basically, including Japan just on July 22nd. Yeah, which was, I think, it was Friday, a few Fridays ago. But the following day, Saturday, I had the same experience, just going out, parks and everywhere full of people catching those Pokemon.
Yesterday on the train, there was a guy standing next to the door using it. I was standing behind him, and the Pokemon he was trying to catch was like out of the window of the door.
Oh, right.
So it was like the gremlin on the wing of the plane in the Twilight Zone.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
So you're going to somehow link this to English teaching?
Perhaps not.
I thought like...
Who said the TEFL news had to be about TEFL?
Whilst I was jogging, I was thinking they should make a
Oh, sorry.
game where you have to go and catch Pokemon Go players. Like you stand
right.
next to them and you like kind of augmentally, is that what?
Yeah.
You throw stuff at them, or you just throw real stuff at them.
Yeah.
Throw your phone
They
at
probably
them.
wouldn't notice.
So it's been downloaded as of recording time 75 million times,
Okay.
making it definitely one of the most downloaded
Just
apps
under
ever.
our podcast.
Yeah.
Yep.
Second only to our podcast. Do download.
It's been praised for potential health benefits, both physical and mental. So obviously, it's one of the few video games where you actually have to leave your home and go out and walk around.
Sure.
Could this be a kind of therapy for hoarders? They collect all the Pokemons and keep them,
in
but without the dangers of hoarding.
Yeah. And also potential mental health benefits.
Are any of you Are you players?
No.
I downloaded it and I deleted it.
Okay.
Oh, good for you.
So I can now say I tried it.
But did you actually try playing it?
I caught one because they give you like a little training one.
Ah, right.
It's like here's what, and then like, but this was before it came out in Japan, so I downloaded the UK version.
Yeah,
It
right.
didn't work, obviously.
Okay.
So that's
That's
luckily
mainly
it
your
worked.
fault, isn't it?
And I deleted it.
Yeah. But yeah, also for people who maybe don't leave their homes so much, and it's a big phenomenon, especially in Japan. The idea of the hikikomori, who people who don't leave their homes basically, and apparently some of them are now leaving their homes to play this game. And there's also a social aspect to it, which we'll get onto. It's also been criticized, as you can imagine, for causing accidents.
By Matt,
and by Matt. But apparently, like within hours of being released in Japan, there was the first accident. There was a university student who fell down some stairs.
Okay.
And also, apparently, a few Pokestops have been put in somewhat insensitive locations.
The middle of a lake.
The middle of a lake.
Graveyards.
Nuclear,
graveyards.
Apparently, one of
that
the
kind of thing.
nuclear power plant providers that we have here in Japan have requested not to put Pokemon
right.
inside the reactors.
Well, that's
Or inside the
Who's going inside?
Fukushima
Yeah,
exclusion
exactly.
zone.
Right.
But that have been like locations of wartime atrocities and that kind of thing.
It's quite funny.
Yeah. Do you know how it's played? The basics.
You chuck a ball at a Pokemon and it eats
You
it.
catch them, and you
Alright.
train them,
You train them up.
and you go to
Yeah.
like gyms, which the weird thing in Japan is the gyms are often McDonald's.
Oh, okay.
Where have you heard gym and McDonald's in the same sentence?
Jim, my mate Jim McDonald.
No.
who-
Jim Croc.
But I find that an interesting oxymoron,
Popularised.
gym and McDonald's.
yeah.
Perhaps.
Often.
So as far as I can tell, there are Pokestops and Pokegyms, and Pokestops are places where you can find them.
Yeah.
And but the type of Pokemon you find is connected to the physical location. So
Right.
They're what's the word? They're aggregated. They use algorithms to determine like where people are and where to put them and stuff.
Okay.
As far as I know, it's all done
By computers.
by computers. Yeah.
And then there are Pokegyms where you, I guess, fight your Pokemon against other people.
So my question as a non-Pokemon Go player is: once you catch one Pokemon, does that mean that someone else can't catch that?
They call it a gateway Pokemon, and it leads to stronger Pokemon.
Really? That's what I was wondering, because I
But
thought that could lead to violence.
If you're
or
there
that
and
kind
I'm
of
over there,
Yeah.
and there's one, and I caught it before you, does that mean it then
thing.
disappears?
No. I think
Because that would be better. That's more of a game, right?
yeah, but that would involve people getting into fights and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what we
apparently not.
Yeah.
But because they're what I wasn't sure of at first was whether or not like just your own personal game there could be Pokemon everywhere, anywhere.
Yeah.
But there are certain places with our Pokemon, so you do see people congregating.
Yeah.
The building one over from
Yeah.
us in the front. There was
Really?
a bunch of people.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't see that, so I'll have a look later. Yeah.
So there is a social aspect. So and anytime there's a social aspect to something, there is a language learning aspect. Potentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of articles already about potential English language learning activities involving Pokemon Go.
I reckon at next year's or any conferences coming up, it's going to be the effects of insert Pokemon Go on insert English, insert reading, insert.
Sure. Yeah.
Because that's what using insert Pokemon Go to insert
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. So a lot of the activity ideas that have been put out there, they're fine. They're basically the kind of activities. It doesn't have to be specific to Pokemon Go. It's more about the popularity of Pokemon Go. So, for example, students discuss or write an essay about the reasons for why it's so popular.
Fine.
Yeah, a debate about the pros and cons of a game like this.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
That's good. I mean, that's all legitimate.
Yeah. Students like practice giving directions.
Okay.
Like,
To
telling them
Pokestops.
how to get to the nearest Pokestop or Pokegym.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah. A game of Guess Who by describing the different Pokemon.
Okay.
No.
Not sure about that one.
No. Okay.
But it's quite easy.
These
It's
are your
yellow.
ideas.
It's got a
But I think there's a bunch
on
of
its
yellow
arms.
ones, isn't
These
there?
are your ideas.
No.
Oh.
These are all ideas from the internet.
Okay.
Students can make a video explaining what it is or how you play it.
Okay.
Apparently there's a whole kind of etiquette building up around Pokemon Go.
Okay.
In terms of when you are out and in a similar location to somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could it be used as a way of practicing the simple past? I caught a Jigglypuff. It was highly effective.
I went to the lake.
So I think like for youngsters,
Well, yeah, writing. I mean, that's another one, like writing the story or documenting your day out catching Pokemon.
Is a Jigglypuff a Pokemon? Because I've said that twice. I'm starting to wonder if
I
I've
think
got
it
that
is.
wrong.
I think it is.
that's something else. No, I think you make a good argument for like it could motivate young people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's something that could be done more actively with the game itself.
Right. What do you mean?
Was it some way that language learning could be part, like not just like epiphenomena around the concept of it, but something that's actually to do with the app?
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, it's the key point is that people will kind of congregate in one place. So yeah.
Do you think people are really talking to each other? I don't think they're talking to each other.
Apparently they are. Apparently it happens.
Yeah.
Apparently people. I mean, not always, but apparently people do.
You're just turning into an old man going.
Yeah.
These
an instant reaction against it.
I'm just taking a position. You're very pro. I'm very.
I'm not very pro. I'm just.
Oh.
And I'm the
know.
neutral one. Yes.
Yeah.
The golden mean.
I don't think if they built in some sort of bartering system where you had to like message the other people.
That's the kind of thing I was
I
thinking.
think that's apparently they're planning to
saying,
implement a lot more features, and including trading Pokemon, and those kind of things to make it more sociable.
Could you use it to teach Pokemon language? Pika Pika.
The Poke Go.
Could you talk to your Pokemon? Like
It's not Pokemon Go, as in
Pika Pika, and then you say, "All right, shut up, Pikachu." I don't know.
Perhaps.
I don't know.
So I guess a couple of issues that have come up with is, and maybe it comes up with a lot of these kinds of things, is do you think it's a good idea for educators in general to try and glom on to the latest fad?
I think we've got a good chance of ruining it for the kids, so why not?
Right.
Everything and everyone are going to try and capitalise on this fad. And we probably will as well. We'll probably put this in the title of the podcast as first, even though it's the last segment.
And then
we'll
hashtag Pokemon
We'll put this
Go.
first, and we may get some downloads.
Do you think, so I've heard that other developers are trying to design apps using the same technology. Do you think that there is a potential for this kind of technology for language learning?
Well, we've talked about augmented
Yeah.
reality in the past, and I was very glowing and positive
and
about
now-
it.
I wasn't.
And I still am.
Okay.
You know, I'm
So this
undecided.
is an example of augmented reality in action.
Sure.
But to do with Pokemon.
But
This
you could go,
this wasn't
an app
made
you
for the
go and
classroom.
catch English words. You go find
Okay,
a tree
yeah,
and then
yeah.
catch. That becomes
That's a
part
good-
of your
that's a good idea,
vocabulary.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, nice.
Why don't you just go and look at a tree and just say, there's a tree.
You've got to find the hidden words hidden around the neighbourhood
Yep.
to make a sentence.
Mhm.
You've got to put them in the right. You've got to find them in the correct order.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
You chart a little on the
Yeah.
map.
There's
Yep.
a little map screen, and you follow the map, and you find the words and click.
Is your daughter playing this?
No.
Okay.
Is your other child playing?
No. No.
Will you let them play this?
I mean, they don't play those kind of
They don't
games.
have a smartphone, right?
Yeah. They're a bit young for that still.
Yeah.
And by the time they're old enough to play these kind of games, I don't know.
Probably be fad as it'll disappear.
Well, I mean, I think it's gonna,
Pokemon gone.
Pokemon gone. I think there'll be all kinds of augmented reality games by then.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any drawbacks? Any dangers with Pokemon Go?
Well,
You might replace your vocabulary with Pika Pika instead of- Yeah, you might fall down some stairs or in a lake or
you
whatever.
might speak less to people and just do this all day and not really communicate with anyone.
Yeah.
See, I don't see that because I think people say the same thing about like online communities and Facebook. It's like no, people aren't communicating, but they're actually communicating
are.
all the time,
Right.
like,
Yeah,
more
that's
than they ever
a different
were.
way of
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah, and I think there's probably more communication going on with Pokemon Go than you're giving it credit for. Even
Playing devil's
just
advocate.
even just more people talking about Pokemon Go is
Yeah.
stimulating conversation in that way.
And if you can build in kind of more, international communication.
Yeah,
I don't know if that works with this kind of game, but potentially.
yeah.
Okay, well, that's TEFL culture, not news, culture.
Hardly culture.
Pokemon Go.
So thank you very much for listening to today's episode.
If you'd like to get in contact with us, please send an email to TEFLology@gmail.com.
If you're on email.
If you're on email. Or you can follow us on Twitter @TEFLology or like our Facebook page. If you do all of those, it's a great way to support the show. If you like the show, you might not. So
You don't have to do all of those. Do one of those.
do all of them. Why not?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, it only takes seconds to do each one,
Okay.
apart from the email.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, do that. So it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Hit it.
Hit what? You're not a good storyteller, and I
my-
don't find you attractive.
the third
I fancy
study-
Stephen King.
I must say, Rob, you're a great storyteller.
Thank you.
Not just sexually.